Hi everyone, welcome to another edition of LSATs from Jake's Closet. Today we're going to talk about logical reasoning and what I call the LR decision tree. This is the point that we should get to when it comes to reading an LR section, doing an LR section timed, and being able to determine what your action plan is question by question. This sort of encompasses the entirety of what is asked of you in LR, and it's a skill that we have to develop in and of itself, deciding what I'm supposed to do when I read this question. So job one is to determine whether the question in front of you is an argument-based question or not, right? So here we are in our LR section, right? And choice one, argument or not an argument. And by argument and not argument, I don't mean that the things in the non-argument questions don't have claims, right? But rather, is the thrust of the question argument-based, right? Are we asking about the argument itself? And so I'm going to take us through the non-argument-based questions first, just so we can talk about what those are, so we can recognize them quickly, because those are easy to recognize. Our choices are parallel arguments, parallel principles, things like that. Here, I'm going to zoom out a little bit so we can see everything. Parallel arguments, parallel principles. Choice number 2 is a paradox. And choice number 3 is a debate. So let's describe what these three things are, okay? The parallel argument is, here is a series of premises, here's a series of facts that are sort of linked together. Which of the following answer choices is most similar to the one above? Or here is an argument. Which of the following has an argument that is similar or that is parallel to the reasoning above? Or which of the following has a structure of reasoning that is similar to the one above, right? This is a matter of saying, okay, do I understand the format, the structure of what's above, of what's in the stimulus? It could be an argument. It could have a claim or a conclusion. It may not have a claim or a conclusion. But regardless, what you're asked to do is go look to see whether the thing in the stimulus is parallel to the things in the answer choices. And in that way, we don't approach it the same way we approach a quote-unquote argument LR question. A paradox is one in which you have a series of statements. Usually it's 3, right, where they give you a context first, and then they give you something that is true about that context, and then they give you a second thing that's true about that context. But the second thing that's true is seemingly conflicting with the first, right? They seem to be mutually exclusive. How could that be, right? The context could be, Manhattan is a very large island. There are millions of people who live on Manhattan. Yet, you go out sometimes of the day and there's no one on the street. So how could it be possible that there are millions of people and no one on the street? And your job is to resolve that paradox with an idea that allows both of those things to be true, that there are millions of people and yet somehow there's no one on the street. And of course that would be those millions of people that live in Manhattan all tend to work at the same time and so are mostly indoors for much of the day, right? And that allows there to be millions of people, but there also allows them to not be all on the street at the same time. So that's what a paradox question is. And finally, we have a debate question. These are easy to spot because you'll have 2 speakers. The speakers will be noted with a colon at the beginning of their statement. Speaker 1 will say a thing and have an analysis of that thing. Speaker 2 will usually disagree with Speaker 1's analysis in some specific way. And what you're asked to do usually is to identify the way in which they disagree. Sometimes you'll be asked to go a step further and ask how one of them would respond to part of the other one's argument, or something like that. But ultimately what you've got is two speakers. So here we have our three non-argument based questions. And we have approaches for all three of them. The parallel questions, what we're really trying to do is map out the structure of what's given to you in the stimulus, in some way. That might be in conditional statements, that might be in a Venn diagram. We may not actually write it out if you get skilled enough at sort of envisioning it in your head. It may be an argument, in which case you're identifying what the conclusion is and how they reach that conclusion. But all we're doing is mapping it onto the answer choices and see which one is structured most similarly. The paradox, we're looking for a statement in the answers that allows both things to be true. And in the debate, we're usually trying to identify the exact thing that they disagree about, or the way one would respond to the other. So those are the non-argument questions. The argument questions all have something very fundamental in common, or rather, a number of things very fundamental in common. Number one, they will all have a claim, right? And that claim is a stated opinion about something. It's an analysis of facts. We have to seek that out first. What is the claim, the thing the author is trying to get you to believe is true, right? That will usually be stated as an opinion. There's some tip-offs, right? There could be a transition word that says something like therefore or thus, right, which would tip you off that what we've got is a conclusion. There are also some sort of content words in there. It could be something like probably or should or something else that sort of leads you to believe that it's a conclusion rather than just a stated fact. It could be something like causes, right, or some other synonym of causation, right? Thus, Jake causes his students' scores on the LSAT to go up. So that's our conclusion. So we're looking for, when we've got an argument, job one is find the conclusion. Job two is find the premises. Premises are facts and evidence, and there are two major kinds. There are evidentiary premises. Evidentiary premise or premises. There might be more than one, right? And those are things that directly support the conclusion that you drew. Jake causes his student scores to go up. Well, how do you know that? Well, Jake has taught 300 LSAT students in the last 5 years, and of those students, 297 of them had their scores go up by more than 10 points. Okay, well, why do we care? Well, we care because tutors whose students' scores go up that much clearly cause those students' scores to go up. Now, of course, this isn't a valid argument, but for the sake of what would be on the LSAT, that's possible. So that third thing, right, is what we call a premise of principle. And that's PLE, right? A premise of principle. Some overarching principle, something that everybody accepts to be true, that governs the context, right? Tutors whose students' scores go up directly cause them to go up. It's not a valid argument, but c'est la vie. Ice cream is the best way to cool off in the summer. Coffee is good for your blood pressure. I'm really hoping that one's true. So these are overarching ideas. They're not direct evidence. They're not things that we've measured or things that we've observed, but rather they are things that are accepted to be true, stipulations for the context. And those are premises of principle. So we have to figure out what those are, right? And then 9 times out of 10 at least, we have to identify flaws in the argument. What's wrong with this argument? Well, in the case of Jake and his tutoring students, right, all we've said is that there's a correlation between Jake tutoring them and their scores going up. We haven't said anything about how it happens or that it would have happened without Jake tutoring them. Maybe their scores would have gone up anyway. Maybe those students were working with a secondary tutor or were in another class, right? And we haven't said anything about the methods by which Jake achieves it. So it could be that Jake doesn't do anything except get them to work hard, in which case it's not really Jake causing it to happen, it's those students causing it to happen. So we're trying to identify flaws. Okay, so these are our 4 main objectives when we see an argument question. I have to do these things first. How do we do them? We ask ourselves questions, right? So the set of questions we ask to get there is, what is the claim, right? What is the opinion? Claim and opinion here for me are synonymous, even though they're not synonyms, right? But for the sake of the LSAT, claims are always opinion-based. They're analysis-based. They're, here are the facts and here's what I think about them. Here's what I believe to be true about them, right? That data demonstrate that this conclusion is possible, rather than this is what the data show, right? So what is the claim? Now, in order to find the evidentiary premise, my reaction to the claim has got to be this. Oh, really? Why? Jake's a good tutor? Oh, really? Why? Well, Jake's student scores go up. Ah, that's my evidence. Okay. How do I get to the principle? The principle is, so what? Who cares? Right? Jake's student scores go up? So what? Who cares? Well, tutors whose student scores go up are generally good tutors. Ah, so that's my principle, right? The overarching principle, right? We should get ice cream today. Oh, really? Why? Well, because it's 95 degrees out. So what? Who cares? Well, the best thing to do on a hot day to cool off is to get ice cream. Ah, that's my principle, right? The best thing to do. That's what everybody believes. We have to accept it. Remember, we always accept our premises, right? They're facts in the LSAT world, so we can't challenge them. Oh, if the LSAT's telling me that that's the best thing to do, then it must be the best thing to do. Okay, and then how do we find our flaws? We find our flaws are, okay, well, we've heard our principle, but what if, right? What if there are no ice cream shops open because there's a pandemic and you're not allowed to buy any ice cream, right? What if I'm lactose intolerant, so we shouldn't get ice cream because I'll be much worse off? What if Jake's students all work with secondary tutors as well, and those tutors are doing a better job than Jake, right? Those are the what ifs. That's how you get your flaws. So what is the claim is number 1. Number 2, oh really? Why? Number 3, so what? Who cares? And number 4, what if? Every one of those argument-based questions, and this includes, what is the conclusion? What is the evidence on which the conclusion is based? What is a flaw in this argument? What is an assumption made by this argument, either necessary or sufficient? How could you strengthen the argument? How could you weaken the argument? Which of the following is most supported by the argument? Every one of those questions, you need to do this first. Because once you do, then those questions are easy to answer, right? What's the conclusion? Well, fine, I can just go to number 1. What's the evidence? Fine, I can just go to number 2. What is the principle? On what is a possible principle on which this is based? Oh, well, I never had a principle. I need one that answers the question, oh, really, why? Right? What's an assumption made? Well, it must be connecting the gap of the flaw, right? Because that's what an assumption is. It fills in the flaw. How do I strengthen the argument? Provide more evidence. Provide me a principle. Close up one of my flaws, right? How do I weaken the argument? Exploit one of my flaws, right? Or provide alternative pathways. Weaken one of my premises by providing an alternate path. Get rid of one of my frameworks of causation, which we can talk about in another video, right? This is it. Because once you've done all this work, answering the question should be straightforward. So this is Jake's decision tree on LR, and I hope that's helpful.